A week later, on the Colonel's ranch. Next week I'll go to London on my yacht. With this war in Europe, there are many good business opportunities for us. You're right, Colonel. I can monitor everything here. You can leave without a worry. With the Redeemer's death, the situation is back to normal and the government won't send any more investigators, providing there are no more uprisings. Okay, Almeida. Put a bounty of 1,000 crowns of gold on Shershot's head. Once he's dead, our troubles will truly be over. You can give me the 1,000 crowns. I've brought you my own head, in person. Yeah. Bang. 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 What's going on? I don't know, let's see. Over there in the courtyard of the Colonel's ranch. Bang. It's sure shot. He killed the Colonel. What are you waiting for, gringo? Hugo Pratt's CORTO Maltese gets credited as one of the most influential comic runs of all time, especially for one that you've likely never heard of. In fact, a later volume than the one we read today is one of the first graphic novels, at least a volume put out entirely telling a self-contained narrative longer than an individual issue or serialized narrative. Obviously, there's lots of debate as to what the first graphic novel is, but this is one of the contenders. If you read the back cover of this edition that I've read, it has quotes from all sorts of luminaries of American comics, from Frank Miller, who included CORTO Maltese references in a lot of his works, Brian K. Vaughan, Brian Michael Bendis. All of your faves are here. Ed Brubaker, Matt Fraction. They all think CORTO Maltese is one of the greatest comics of all time. It gets compared to works like Ulysses, monumental epics of history that span decades in the life of this one character. His journeys across the sea, primarily in Latin and South America, it seems, at least in this volume. So what makes CORTO Maltese so great that the back cover jacket has no room for plot and is only just quotes from comic book celebrities? Why do they all love CORTO Maltese so much? If this is your first time here, I'd like to extend you a gracious welcome on this channel. You can support my work by liking this video, commenting with some of your favorite comics, and subscribing to this channel. All those things are free ways that you can support the work I do here. You can also support me with $5 a month over on Patreon. Get your name thrown in at the end of this video. You can find my writing over at SpikeStonehand.com, where I have news, reviews, interviews, links to other people's stuff that I think is worth your time, and a weekly new comics buyer's guide. But all that aside, let's dig into the comic of CORTO Maltese. My name is Steven, but you might better know me by my superhero alter ego, Spike Stonehand, and welcome to my channel, Divining Comics, where I explore the magic hidden between the panels of some of your favorite comics.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality.
So CORTO Maltese is the second installment in my look at adventure comics. These are the very popular comic genre, especially in Europe and in America before the superhero boom of the Silver Age. So these are comics that maybe you've never read before, and that's what this whole channel is about. I've designed a challenge where they have 52 weeks and 52 comics from across the globe and from across history, designed to expand your knowledge and my knowledge of the breadth and depth of comics as a global and historical art form. And if you'd like to participate in this challenge, you can find a link to all 52 categories in the description of this video. We're about halfway through the year, a little bit over that maybe, and we've covered all sorts of greats from America, Japan, from the past to the present, Europe, all over the globe, and that'll only continue as this project goes on. So check out some of the videos in my catalog if you want some more inspiration for comics that maybe you've never explored before or have been on your to-read list forever, and you want to hear what I think if they're worth your time. But without further ado, let's dig into Hugo Pratt's CORTO Maltese. So this was the first volume published in a 12-volume set by Euro Comics. I've been told that I think this is a pretty expensive edition to get on the secondhand market. I got it from my local library, and maybe you can do something similar, but Fantagraphics is publishing later this year the first of a full color set of the complete CORTO MALTESE. So if that's your thing and you want to have these for your own home collection, keep an eye out for that. I think coming later in October, November this year from Fantagraphics. This is a black and white edition. As you can see, it's fairly large, wider than a lot of the traditional American comics. And it is a serialized comic at this point. There's 6 chapters in this volume, and each one, although it tells stories in a sequence, it is very episodic, right? Like a TV show or, manga like One Piece, right? You have the characters go and explore different things and they'll stay in an area for a little bit. Some characters will come and characters will go. This kind of tells the volume a little bit on the earlier side of the CORTO Maltese chronology, even though it isn't technically the first edition chronologically. I don't know why they chose to start with this one, but this was the first one they published, so it's what I read. CORTO Maltese is the captain of a ship. He seems to kind of have a desire to explore, to never put down roots in any one place, and he is your classic archetypal guy who presents outwardly as gruff and cynical, but has a heart of gold. And that comes into some of the plots, as we'll talk about in this volume. He's joined for most of this volume by Professor Steiner, who's this eccentric, odd guy who believes in all sorts of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of what we call Fortean, or named after Charles Fort in his magazine, kind of beliefs, Blavatskyite, astrology, all sorts of those kinds of esoteric occult stuff of the 19th and 20th century. A lot of that finds its place here. Particularly the first issue deals with the lost city of Mu, MU. For those of you that are curious, it's similar to Atlantis, kind of a fabled lost continent somewhere in the ocean. In this occult lore, the previous race of humans that were more advanced than humanity has even gotten to at this point were part of this island, and somehow, for whatever reason, catastrophe struck and it disappeared. Like I said, very similar to Atlantis. You see this a lot in your Ancient Aliens stuff. It's a very common 19th century esoteric belief that I think comes from Blavatsky into a lot of the comics, right? And you have Lemuria and Atlantis in Marvel Comics, Atlantis in DC Comics. So it's a very common trope here. In this volume, there is a guy named Tristan Bantam. He's a young English boy whose father has died recently, and he gets caught up in this big conspiracy involving his father's holdings. His father was searching for Mu when he died, and there's nefarious forces to try and get his father's money that now Tristan is the controller of. And you also meet Tristan's sister, Morgana, who seems to have some sort of magical powers of her own, tarot, psychic readings, all sorts of things like that. She is herself actually half indigenous Brazilian. She's his half-sister there, and she kind of involves him in this mysterious woo-woo plot where he has a dream and visits the lost island of Mu in his psychic visions. It's all very esoteric and hippie and interesting in those ways. And that's actually one of the things I thought was most interesting about this volume, is how much of the later Hellboy DNA I could see in this series, and it makes me think that Mignola must have either been stewing in some of the same influences as CORTO Maltese if he wasn't outright reading it himself. You can see this especially even in the art style, which has a very doodly but full of heavy shadow style, maybe more reminiscent of Phil Hester than Mignola himself. But the art style feels very modern and interesting and sparse, while at the same time having these deep shadows and expressive, almost caricaturesque faces, especially to distinguish all these different characters. I think it does a really good job at giving everybody different bodies and different faces. It does a really job at expressing character through the sparse facial lines that are given for all the characters here. And just staying on the art for a second, I think that the action sequences in this volume are really well done, especially for something so stylish. You often see in other comics a bit more abstract action during the fight sequences, but I think that is not something that is compromised at all here. Perhaps the larger European style format allows for a greater panel density, and they can experiment a little bit more with some interesting action sequences than American comics where you have limited page real estate. But I thought this did a really good job of giving you very cool, visually engaging fight sequences, wrestling moves, all sorts of stuff like that. Comparing this to the previous adventure story that we read, Tintin, I will say that not only is this definitely much more for adults, and you can tell that with a much more adult art style. Like, it feels something you could have published this in a Vertigo comic in the 90s or an Image Comics in the 2000s and 2010s, and you would not have noticed any difference. This could be, other than, I guess, the fact that it's maybe a little bit more dialogue heavy than some of those. This is a very good comic in that sense. It's very well done in its serialized chapters. Each issue kind of tells a more or less complete narrative on Corto Maltese's longer journey. And again, compared to Tintin, it is a much more nuanced and I would say probably historically accurate take on a lot of the indigenous cultures that it's dealing with. It feels much more respectful. I think there are some of the drawings that do feel a bit kind of caricaturish, but nothing anywhere near as offensive as the blackface in Tintin. And again, the cultural stereotypes are a little less broadly drawn here. I think that there's a lot of interesting depth. One of the plots in this story involves Maltese and a group of indigenous rebels that are fighting against their colonial overlords. And Maltese, even though he kind of presents, like I said, your Han Solo type, like I'm above it all, I don't need this, he does ultimately side with the revolutionary fighters. When the revolutionary leader at that time dies, Maltese inspires one of the next generation of young people to take up the mantle and continue the fight. He definitely has that kind of anti-colonial spirit that I think Pratt maybe had as well, and that really comes through in this narrative much more than it did in Tintin, where it can feel kind of more like a European wealthy aristocrat exploring the different colonies across the globe. This feels like much more confrontational, like there is historical realities here. Things didn't always exist the way they were. They used to be different. They're the way they are now, and they will continue to change going forward. And this is true of the cultures and the political situations, and it's true of the characters themselves. I think Maltese here is a much more dynamic character than Tintin could ever be, right? It's going for different target audiences and different types of stories here, but I think Maltese is really interesting in that sense. And to the historical research point, there's a lot of fun details about piracy in the Caribbean. This is maybe not as historically accurate, but he runs into Rasputin, who seems to have kind of a friend-enemy relationship with, a rivalry, if you will. I didn't know Rasputin ever made his way to the Caribbean, but this does take place before Rasputin's death in 1917, so hey, it's totally possible. Again, talking about the kind of Hellboy DNA here, but they are on the search for this buried treasure from a bunch of pirates. That it's if you like those kinds of swashbuckling tales, if you like adventure, a sailor going across and every issue kind of finding a new mystery to solve, a new plot to develop, a new political conflict to explore and develop. This is definitely an interesting story in all of that sense. My one major critique of this volume is that I feel like it needed a central MacGuffin a little bit more. Maybe if I had been able to read the issues that take place chronologically prior to this, I would have gotten that a little bit more. Again, think about like something like One Piece, where you have the search for the One Piece, right? And something like Hellboy, there's this ongoing narrative present from the very beginning of Hellboy's identity, his true destiny to be the ruler of hell, right? Even if there are stories that don't deal with those plots directly or advance them in any ways, it's kind of hanging over the story. It gives the characters motive, and I just really didn't get a lot of that here. You kind of have to infer why Corto Maltese is doing all of this, why he's on the seas and exploring and never setting his roots down. And I wish there would have been a little bit more explicit of a goal here. Like, I think that the first issue we read here, where Tristan is journeying towards the lost island of Mu, I thought that was a little bit stronger of a hook, and it kind of drops off after the first few chapters here. So I don't know if that was something that Hugo Pratt changed his mind on, or what the story is there, but I think that if he had kind of that ongoing goal that he could have always been marching towards in that kind of classic episodic storytelling way, right, where you have the big bad in the season and all the episodes have their individual monster of the week, I think that this could have benefited a little bit from that bigger perspective here. But other than that, I really enjoyed what I read here. So, moving to wrap things up, would I recommend this? Would I want to keep reading it myself? The answer is unequivocally yes. I thought this was phenomenal, just as good as all of the Illuminous creators who have read it before me have said it was. And I'm very excited for the Fantagraphics edition coming out later this year. Would love to get that myself. If you want to learn more about this series, Corto Maltese and the life of Hugo Pratt, I believe Matt with 4 T's, Matttt, has a video on it on his YouTube. I'll probably try and link to that in the description of this video. But who would I recommend this for? If you like adventure stories, if you like kind of this, the character that is going through this journey and has a little series of episodes, different indigenous groups, different people he meets, colonists, Europeans. I think that kind of storytelling, if that's your thing, this is a great example of that. And like I said, if you love things like Hellboy or One Piece, I think there'd be a lot of crossover appeal in this volume. Thanks again for watching this video. Hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, comment below with some of your favorite comics that I should be reading from across the globe. Never stop reading comics, and until next time, never let the magic of comics die.
Old Enoch, he lived to be 365 when the Lord came and took him back to heaven alive. I saw the light from heaven shining all around. I saw the light come shining, I saw that light come down.